I'd worked so hard for 8 years, 10 years, 12 years. I'm number one on the next promotions list. I had nothing to do with the case. I wasn't connected at all. I wasn't even there. But one guy wouldn't go along with everybody else. So did I have to step on him a little bit? Yeah, I had to step on him a little bit. And the last question, I had standardized questions, just dozens of questions. The last question I always asked when they got done was, if the same facts presented itself again, would you do the same thing? And not one time did one of them say they do anything other than what they did before. Intimidate, pressure, threaten. And it's almost like they were trying to get me to agree with them that they had no choice, which I never did. But it points out how much work we have to do. If former leaders could do something that despicable, and then years later still be rationalizing it like they were the victim. Also important is this. There is one particular type of misconduct that will prompt officers, regardless of the type of law enforcement, to buy into taking part in the code of silence, whether it's just not doing anything or falsifying a report or lying to internal affairs. What type of misconduct would you say that it is? It makes sense to me, just thinking about it generally. It's non-lethal excessive use of force. In other words, it's beatings, excessive use of force, but not a shootout where no one was killed and so forth. And not only with those 532 people in those cases that we studied, but also after years of talking about this in open groups, here's the mindset. First of all, the importance is to understand that, put in place safeguards and look for it, include it in discussions and internal training. You could even have facts on the code of silence as part of questions for promotional exams. Ensure that it's in the academy that you select people from. The importance is to train about what's hurting us. As an example, if the most common type of misconduct is excessive use of force, and we don't ever bring that up, don't even mention it. We could be so much better than that. In addition to acknowledging and identifying that's a real danger area for this, and no one forgives lying. Lie to IA, lie in an official report to cover misconduct. Your career's toast. It's over with. It's gone, and no one's ever going to hire you again. So the whole goal is to prevent our own demise, include in training and discussion groups. If you're with a fellow officer, and regardless of what the bad guy is doing, and you glance over your fellow officer because you're the backup, and his veins are sticking out of his neck, his fists are clenched, he's about to unload on this person. The reality is there's one person on earth that has the opportunity to save his or her career, and it's you as the backup officer. If this person gets carried away with their anger and starts to unload on the subject or suspect, it's over. And what he or she's going to be doing is probably shouting for you to help join in where you just stand there for, shouting for you. You've got to overcome that. You've got to overcome that. The technique I always talk about is if he's here, your partner's here that you're being the backup for, and you can tell he's about to really unload on this person, then do this technique. Move right in front of him so he's looking in the back of your head. Cuff the person, get him in the cage guard. Get him away from your fellow officer who's about to destroy his career out of anger. And you had the opportunity to stop it, and you did nothing. Get engaged, overcome the peer pressure aspect of this, and save your fellow officer's career, because that's the ultimate tool for this, looking out for each other. Because if he's about to go into rage, he's not going to have the common sense to control his emotions. Sometimes, in reality, the officer will come back and thank the person who intervened and saved his career. Sometimes the person might be mad. But you'll walk away knowing that you saved his career. And then more solutions. So we had the 532 people who acknowledged, confessed that they had participated in the Code of Silence. So what is it that they said now looking back at their experience in terms of solutions? The things that can be done to prevent people from participating in the Code of Silence and destroying their career. Number one, ethics training. In other words, they were saying, have the kind of training that acknowledges what's really destroying us, like the fact that the excessive use of force. is the made instigator for people lying. And the people that would talk about this, of the 532, they say, more often than not, when they start talking about it to me, they would say, look, I wouldn't have done it for any other reason. I wouldn't have done it for I can't stand the thought of working for the fellow officer who's a thief, or whatever the case. But I can relate to those moments. I can relate to the husband kicking all of his wife's teeth out, and when he gets drunk and beating her to a pulp, over and over and over again, and being convinced he's going to beat her to death some Saturday night, and rationalizing that maybe we're saving her life by doing what we're doing here. I can relate to that. Rationalizing it. That somehow it's okay, and joining in to help beat him up as opposed to stopping him before or as it begins. Ethics training that really confronts our true life problems that's not philosophical or theoretical, really right between your eyes, and with respect, confrontational about how we destroy our careers. And the number 2 reason of those 532, the number 2 solution. Fair, consistent accountability for small infractions. Because in truth, the slippery slope phrase is for real. And then the third most frequent solution given by the 532, open, honest communication between leaders and those that they lead. In other words, do something about the us versus them phenomenon where departments becomes divided. Have organization-wide or division-wide, depending on the size of the agency, group meetings to talk about things that need to be talked about, as opposed to just becoming hateful and divided and letting that grow. Now that was the 532. The other group, remember, there was the group that didn't participate in the Code of Silence. We came back to them and asked them, if they never participated in the Code of Silence, would they mind filling out another survey, just their thoughts about how to prevent the Code of Silence. Once again, the number 1 most frequently said reason for stopping the Code of Silence was high-quality ethics training that talks about the real issues, the way they're really going on, based on a needs assessment. So both groups said the most frequent solution to the Code of Silence was high-quality ethics training. What I found in my travels is the biggest obstacle for this is for the administrators to want to address it to begin with. In other words, for administrators to want to have regular, at least once a year, training that addresses the issues that destroy people, whether it's the Code of Silence or bad morale or customized training just for civilian employees and different kinds of training for line supervisors, for themselves to go to executive development training, because when you customize the training and focus it just on different work groups with different responsibilities, it is far better and far more powerful. And the end result is we prevent our own demise. I'm Neil Troutman, and I'd like to talk about what every supervisor needs to hear. And when I say this, let me qualify what I'm about to say. The vast majority of line supervisors in law enforcement all across the country are capable and do a high-quality job. But even they sometimes can fall into the trap of not appreciating that they're not doing things the way they used to do. Because of the power and influence of line supervisors, in other words, no one has the span of control, no one reaches as many employees as the line supervisor level does, it's absolutely vital that we look in the mirror sometimes, that we ask ourselves, are we doing the very best that we can do? Even though the vast majority do everything right, the small percentage who don't have devastating consequences. Here are the things I'm talking about. The core problem has 4 different causes. One is some line supervisors don't do a very good job because they don't know how to do whatever they're doing. In other words, whether it's dealing with problems of employees or delegation or their leadership style, how they communicate with employees, all those different things, they don't do a good job because they've never developed the skills and the abilities. All of the 18,000 law enforcement agencies in America should already have an FTO mentoring program for new supervisors. The reason that most don't have that is because we've never had a role model. And just like the power of line supervision, the greatest way to alter behavior is role modeling. If you don't have a role model as an organization for something, it's going to take a lot longer for it to spread throughout the country. With the original FTO program, there was the San Jose Police Department back in the early 70s, and because they became the role model for organized field training, it swept the nation relatively quickly. Well, we haven't had that type of a role model for training new supervisors. It doesn't mean that we can't, and it doesn't mean that any law enforcement agency next week couldn't take the steps to create such a program. And with the problem that I'm dealing with now, that some supervisors simply don't have the skills and abilities, that is far better, far more important, far more effective than a seminar that you could send somebody to. And even if you do send all your new supervisors to a 40-hour seminar, that doesn't mean they're going to have the skills at a high enough level to deal day in and day out. It doesn't mean they're not going to be crippled by their own insecurities or lack of self-image, that they start leading by fear. But that's only one of the things we need to think about. Other ones are wanting to be liked more than we want to be a leader. And because of that, small infractions are ignored. The small infractions many times grow to being major problems. Performance evaluations are anything but accurate because if you want to be liked more than your gut tells you you care about being a leader, and you're not held accountable for the quality of your performance evaluations that you give your subordinates, then they're usually the acceptable numbers. They're usually in such a way that no one's going to get mad at you, even though the person doesn't deserve as high a performance evaluation as they got, which means then that the line supervisor has crippled them in terms of their career development. It's healthy for all of us to take a step back every now and then and ask ourselves if we've fallen guilty to one of these flaws, because it's human nature not to acknowledge that to ourselves. But it doesn't end there. Sometimes, because someone has stripes or bars on their shoulders doesn't mean that they're suddenly not human. People can become apathetic at any point during their career. They can have personal problems, family problems, going through a divorce, or just simply get burnt out. And it's good for all of us to take an honest look in the mirror and ask ourselves, are we driven the same way we were the first year we got appointed to the promotion? Or is that zest for law enforcement and leadership something else now, something not very pleasant, something that's driven more often than not by not caring and apathy than the desire to do good and be a positive role model? And last, we can all set integrity indicators for ourselves. We, led by the administration, can track behavior as a supervisor. We can track behavior of the subordinates that we lead. And I'm talking about integrity indicators, such as internal commendations, or the positive letters and phone calls that come in, confirm violations of policy, sick time use, overtime use, those types of things, especially confirm violations of policy. And we can ask ourselves, do we have the courage to address the problems as we see it? Or do we look the other way? You know, there's a huge difference in the ability of line supervisors to identify and see problems with employees as opposed to administrators. Administrators are typically the last level of leadership to learn that there's a problem. So the safeguards, the gatekeepers, if you will, in terms of leadership, are the line supervisors, because they're there with the troops every day interacting. They can catch wind of problems, if things aren't going the way they should be going. They hear the rumors, they hear the gossip. They're right there with the warning signs, as opposed to mid-level management or administrators. And if we don't have the courage to stop and address and confront those things that we hear, then we're not doing our job. The greatest quality of leadership is always going to be courage, and in many cases, the everyday courage. I'm not talking about the physical heroism type courage, but the courage to acknowledge both the flaws in ourselves and the problems that we face that no one would ever find out about if we just keep ignoring. In the end, whether we're a supervisor, an administrator, or not a formal leader, in the end, all of us, more often than not, have memories of how we led our career, how we interacted. The legacy we live behind is typically a legacy of integrity. All of us are well served by looking in the mirror and seeing if we're still the type of leader that we want to follow if we were the subordinate.
I'm Neil Troutman, and I'd like to talk to you today
about what line supervisors need to say to those that they lead about integrity. And in doing so, we can counteract a huge flaw, a huge problem, and ignoring this has devastating consequences. The reality is that most people in law enforcement, sworn full-time personnel, retire, and not once in the 20 to 25 year span of their career have they ever had a direct supervisor sit down and spend 5 minutes in private talking to them about the moments most likely to destroy their career. Makes no sense, totally illogical. It makes you wonder where have we been for the last century that we would ignore the moments most likely to destroy people, the career-ending decisions, unexpected many times, moments of anger, lust, greed, and peer pressure. So the purpose of this segment is to give you some thoughtful ideas, some facts you can talk to them about, because these aren't easy subjects to talk to someone about. Perhaps that's the reason why it usually doesn't happen, even though someone spends 20 years wearing a particular uniform. So let's talk about anger. What can be said about anger? You can tell them there's two different kinds. There's the anger that people typically think of out on the street with a subject during an arrest or an altercation or so forth, excessive use of force type of anger. But the reality is that's not the type of anger that is most hurtful to law enforcement. The type of anger that destroys people, more often than that type, is the anger at your own organization. Try to find a law enforcement agency out of the 18,000 where this wouldn't be true. The statement that most people feel far more negative stress from their own organization than just doing their job, just carrying out their responsibilities. Try to find an organization where that's not true. And that's what I'm talking about. That most anger as opposed to excessive use of force is not, obviously I'm not saying that that's acceptable. And people get fired, people get arrested, people go to prison over that. But it's far more common for anger directed at the organization to take place. And that anger, that frustration, that bitterness that evolves into cynicism, that's what we use to rationalize our own misconduct. And most people have never had anybody talk to them about that. And in particular, the people who have already become bitter and hateful. So to sit down and talk to those that we lead about the danger of that, and it's slow and it's almost seductive almost, and we can point to